Welcome to Eric's Drink Whiskey. We're going to take a little step back in time here and try one of, if not America's very first spirit, rye whiskey. Tonight I am drinking Willet Family Estate Rye whiskey. This is their small batch rye, aged in selected white oak barrels for 4 years and hand bottled at cask strength 111.6. If you've ever had rye whiskey before, you know it's a little different than the average whiskey. Some would say Christmas. Some would say walking into the woods or the forest. And that's what I get. Tall pines. All right, that'll do it. Yep, that's yep, nothing but pine. Yep. All right, so welcome to Eric's Drink Whiskey. As you probably could tell, I'm not the biggest rye whiskey fan, but we are trying to showcase what rye whiskey is to everyone for this month. There are a few rye whiskeys that I quite enjoy, and we'll dive into those into a little bit. But welcome to the history lesson you're about to get. Just talk a little bit about what rye whiskey is. So according to the TTB in the United States of America, that is the Alcohol Trade and Tobacco Bureau, a rye whiskey, for some to be considered a rye whiskey, a straight white whiskey at that, has to be at least 51% rye, has to be aged in a charred oak container, doesn't necessarily necessitate a barrel, and the rest of it has to be a form of a cereal grain, rye, wheat, or wheat, barley, rice, whatever. It was the first spirit to come to America. Just to give you a little brief history, the first recorded history was by a gentleman by the name of William Cleft. He was a director of a Dutch colony in New Amsterdam, and he ordered a distillation of rye because that was kind of like the main grain in the Netherlands area. The Netherlands, Germany, kind of that little area, and then he was trying to mimic it the same ways that the Scots did with their whiskey and trying to adopt some of the same techniques. Eventually the colonization came over to America and kind of settled in Pennsylvania. It's kind of where you get that Pennsylvania Dutch vibe, and the culture over there. And if you check throughout history books on what made rye whiskey so prevalent in the early parts of it, a lot of the rye whiskey that was sourced by these big-time bourbon distillers came from Maryland and came from Pennsylvania. Because that's, it's, as a turf grass major, ryegrass only grows in a very certain particular climate. It likes cold. It doesn't like the heat at all. So kind of limited on where it can grow. Now, there are some ryes that have been grown in Florida. But Eric Miller touched on those before. But, the original, I believe the original people that ran it were the Beams, the Overholts, and the Shinks. If you're familiar with Shinks Bourbon, it's owned by the Michter's Distillery. Lord Overholt's another famous rye whiskey brand. And then Jim Beam, everybody knows who Jim Beam is. They've made plenty of ryes over the years. Now, with rye, it grew very popular, and they didn't start incorporating corn into the rye mash until it got to America, because they weren't growing corn over in New Amsterdam really. So it came over here. They started messing with the grain. They discovered sugar cane. The sugar cane had trade kind of dried up in the West Indies from some politics going on in colonial England, and then America had to create a new source of distilled spirits to fuel the demand. that's kind of a little brief history on rye whiskey and how it got here. Now, the evolution of it through the late 20th or through the 20th century is sporadic just as much as the actual recipes are. Now, this particular bottle is made by the Willet Distillery. You can find this in most places pretty reasonable. I want to say it's $55 maybe. And it is 4 years old. And not bad for a 4-year-old cast strength rye whiskey. Not quite sure on the mash bill on this one, but I can only give you a certain amount of tasting notes. Very Christmassy. A lot of clove. I don't get your typical dill flavors that you get with rye, but this one, it's very cinnamon. My mother used to have this potpourri thing that she would keep out around Christmas time, and it reeked. But you know, it was hers, so we just gotta let her roll with it. But it was just, it's full of all those spices, those I don't know, it's the smells of Christmas. I don't know. Rye is a very interesting whiskey. That's with any whiskeys. This particular one, that grain is the word isn't harsh, but it's a very powerful grain if you're not careful with it. It can overpower a whiskey, or it can make your whiskey the best whiskey you ever had. All depends on what the distiller tried to do with it, but you know, I probably will never be a huge rye fan, but who knows? I might even finish this whole thing. Might even give me another glass. And that's it. Hope you learned a little bit of something about rye whiskey. Please give us a like, share, and subscribe. Eric's Drink Whiskey, YouTube. Eric's _drinks _whiskey, Instagram. And please check us out weekly. Cheers, and have a good evening.